this is very, very important, and I hope that this reaches people. This is for anyone who's ever been abused or hurt or in any way by someone who claimed to be in ministry, in Christian ministry. The problem we have is we define Christianity by Old Covenant terms. And in the Old Covenant, there was something called a Levitical priest. The Levitical priest was someone who had a birthright office of ministry, who ministered on an altar, who had authority over the congregation of Israel, who collected the offerings and lived off the offerings, ministered in the house of God, the sanctuary. It sounds very familiar. But can I tell you that that office is done away with in the New Testament? Can I tell you that there is not supposed to be a Levitical priesthood? The New Testament redefines ministry. It says that the New Testament church is, every believer is a priesthood in the New Testament church. It says everyone has the right to a priesthood in the New Testament church. This is a huge change and a different change, and it makes sense to the New Testament. But what I want to tell you and explain to you is there's a new definition of ministry in the New Testament, and it has to do with the fact that God is the one who calls true ministry. And ministry, since it's in every believer, it's not a permanent office or position of authority over others. In the New Testament, Jesus said 5 times that we should not exercise authority one over another among ourselves. It was literally the only thing he asked for, or asked that we do among ourselves. Do not exercise authority one over another among yourselves. Obviously, if someone was abused, someone else exercised authority over them. In fact, Jesus said that ministry specifically is not someone who exercises authority over other believers. And he said because why should we not exercise authority? Because God is supposed to be in charge of everything. Okay, God is supposed to be the head of everything. So here's the thing. If you were ever abused by someone in ministry who claimed to be in ministry, the truth of the matter is that the very second that person conceived of the idea of abusing you, they stepped out of ministry. They were not in godly ministry. They were not in God's will. They were not walking in God's kingdom. That's absolutely true and obvious and sure to be seen and understood. You have to understand there's this different definition of ministry in the New Testament. Tradition has told us that a minister is someone who owns a pulpit or ministers in the house of God. But you see, in the New Testament, ministry is found in the moments of time when any Christian, any believer, actually walks in God's kingdom, that is his authority and his will, and serves him. And that service will always come out in love. It'll come out in love toward others. It'll come out in spreading the gospel and helping people be fed and clothed and healed and delivered. That will be the result of true Christian ministry. Okay, I just want to say, God is not fooled. God is not fooled by someone who has a robe or a collar, or who ministers on an altar, or who ministers in a building, or who stands in a position with authority, or who... God is not fooled by the education that someone may have received, or the stature, or their age, or any of those things. The truth of the matter is we are all sinners, and we all have fallen from grace, and the truth is we are saved by the grace of God and faith in Jesus Christ. And as we walk through this life, all of us, in any given moment of time, may be serving God, or we may not be serving God. We may be serving sin, we may be serving our own lusts and flesh and our own, or we may be serving what the devil wants. Okay? We could be serving God, or we could be serving sin. It's one or the other in any given moment of time. So the truth of the matter is, and this is what's confusing to people, someone who is in a ministry position that we call ministry, this what I call an old covenant ministry position, we have the belief that somehow everything they say and do is from God. But that's simply not true. It's not true in the Bible. You can look in the Bible and find Peter, for example, St. Peter, who in one instance, Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ, you are the Messiah." And Jesus says to Peter, Peter, this is the key to the kingdom. You've heard this from God. So in that moment of time, Peter was exactly right in the will of God, wasn't he? He was doing exactly what God wanted done. He was following God. He was in the kingdom. He was serving God. Read the next verse or two down. Jesus then goes on to say that he must die in Jerusalem. And Peter says, no, don't let this happen. And what does Jesus call Peter? He says, get thee behind me, Satan. In the next instant in time, Peter is now serving Satan, saying something that Satan would want said. And it makes sense because the devil would not want Jesus to die for the sin of the world. Peter has stepped right out of God's kingdom into sinful service to the devil in an instant in time. And that's the confusing part maybe for people to understand. But yes, maybe that person who abused you also was in other times, periods of time, was good and kind and gentle and served God and did wonderful things for people and maybe even did great things for you. But at the moment, the second that that person conceived of the idea of abuse and went into the lust of their own flesh, they were not a minister. And it didn't matter if they wore a collar or wore the robe or walked in whatever education or stature that the community or other organizations may have given them. In God's eyes, they were serving Satan. And that's just the way it works. That's the way it works. And I pray if you understand that, maybe you can find some degree of healing from that. And don't blame God, because God is not fooled. God is not a fool, and he is not fooled by the little rules and the little regulations and the traditions that we put on people. People are all the same. People are all the same. We are all sinners. And if we are believers, we are saved by grace. And if we are saved by grace, we continue to walk this life seeking God's kingdom. We are supposed to continually seek his authority, his will, and to serve him. And your service to God is every bit as important as anyone else's. That's something that's very rarely ever said. But your service to God, the things you do to help others and to love others, that's just as important to God as anyone else's. There isn't anyone who's supposed to be any better or have authority over others within the body of Christ. And I pray you'll receive that in the name of Jesus.